The question that everybody's asking themselves right now, will Alabama make it into the college football playoffs? Let me know your prediction down in the comment section. Type Y for yes or N for no. What's going on, Alabama fans? Chris Daughtry here with the Alabama Football Report by Chat Sports. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about some SEC championship game scenarios, and we're also going to talk about where Alabama ranks now in the updated college football playoff rankings and why it's a little bit hypocritical why they are ranked where they're at right now. First thing, though, we are going to talk about those SEC championship game scenarios. And hand up, I actually missed a scenario that would have Alabama missing out on the SEC championship, even with a loss versus Auburn. Originally, I thought you beat Auburn, you're in, but there's a scenario, highly unlikely that this does end up actually happening, but even with a win versus Auburn and a couple other things happening, Alabama could still end up missing out on the SEC championship game, and it all starts with this scenario coming up this weekend. Florida taking on Tennessee if Florida wins that game, and Vanderbilt taking on Kentucky this weekend if Kentucky wins that game, and a couple other things happen. There's a chance that Alabama could actually miss out on the SEC championship game. So I'm going to slide over here, and Billy's going to push this next graphic. This is the SEC championship, standings, different, simulator that you can go to and just figure out, you can click different scenarios and stuff like that. So the scenario with those two things happening there, Florida beating Tennessee and Vanderbilt losing to Kentucky, you have a couple different things here. Texas A&M beating Texas in the last week of the season, and then Tennessee beating Vanderbilt in the last week of the season. I think both of those things could end up happening. I do think they're, pretty likely that those things would happen there. If this happens, Alabama would actually miss out on the SEC championship game, and this is what the SEC standings would end up looking like if those scenarios actually happened. Texas A&M would be number one in the SEC. Georgia would then jump up to number 2. Ole Miss would jump up over Alabama to number 3, and then Alabama falls all the way down to number 4 in the SEC. And basically the reason that would be the case there with Ole Miss being below Georgia, that's going to be based off of conference opponent win percentage. Ole Miss, would be based off of winning percentage against the 5 teams all played one time. Basically, that's just, Ole Miss and Alabama both played Oklahoma. Ole Miss beat Oklahoma. Alabama ended up losing to Oklahoma. So that is the scenario right now where Alabama beats Auburn and they still end up missing out on the SEC championship game. Now I'm going to slide over again here. There's another scenario that I want to talk about here. This is if those two scenarios happen. There's still same thing with Florida beating Tennessee and Vanderbilt beating Kentucky. That doesn't necessarily mean Alabama totally misses out on the SEC championship game. If Texas beats Texas A&M and Tennessee beats Vanderbilt, I still think both of those scenarios could definitely happen there. Alabama would then get in to the SEC championship game, but it would not be Texas A&M that they would end up playing there. Scenario 2, the SEC standings would then have Georgia at number 1 in the SEC and then Alabama at number 2 in the SEC. So Alabama versus Georgia in the SEC championship game, just like God intended there. With Ole Miss and Texas A&M, below Georgia based on conference opponent win percentage, Alabama would be above Ole Miss and Texas A&M in this scenario based on conference opponents win percentage there. And I do want to note as well, Texas and Vandy, if they both win, it would still be Alabama versus Georgia there, so it really wouldn't be any type of change there. One more scenario that I want to slide over and show you guys here as well. Texas A&M and Vanderbilt both end up winning those games in the last weekend of the season there. Alabama would still be into the SEC championship game. All of these, though, barring that Florida and Tennessee game, the Kentucky Vanderbilt game coming up this weekend, and obviously all of them has to do with Alabama beating Auburn in the last week of the season. If that scenario ended up playing out there, you would then play Texas A&M in the SEC championship game. You would be above Georgia based on that head-to-head record. Obviously, Alabama and Georgia ended up playing each other there, and Georgia would be above Ole Miss based off the conference opponent win percentage there. But like I said, this all comes from if, a very highly unlikely scenario ends up happening this weekend with Florida beating Tennessee and Kentucky beating Vanderbilt. And I just wanted to show you guys that just because, it was my original thought when I was playing around with the prediction machine there that all Alabama had to do was beat Auburn and you're in. That's not necessarily the case. There is still a scenario. If this happens and a couple other things happen, go back to that scenario number one. If Alabama beats Auburn, there still is a chance that they end up missing out on the SEC championship game. So I want to hear from you guys down inside the comment section at the pinned comment of today's video. Do you even want to make the SEC championship game? There's a lot of mixed opinions out there whether somebody wants to make it or not. Let me know what you guys think. Type 1 if you do want to make the SEC championship game, or type 0 if you don't want to make the SEC championship game. All right, so I see both sides to the argument here. I am always a believer in conference championships actually meaning something. I think it is a massive accomplishment to win an SEC title, and it guarantees you a spot into the college football playoffs. But on the flip side of things, playing devil's advocate here, if you make it to the SEC championship game and lose, Alabama would then have 3 losses, and I have zero faith in the college football playoff selection committee to put Alabama in with 3 losses. I know a lot of people are going to bring up SMU from last season getting in with a loss to Clemson in the ACC championship game. The problem there is, though, that was SMU's only 2nd loss of the season. So the situation is a little bit different there. I've seen an argument for, rest out there. I think the rest argument is just totally irrelevant to me. If you don't go to the SEC championship game, you risk going on the road in the first round of the playoffs. And if you win the SEC championship game, you're almost guaranteed a first round bye, by being one of the highest ranked conference champions. But if you go and you lose, you do put yourself at risk of just totally missing the playoffs altogether. So, it's a double-edged sword right now. There's pros and cons to both situations there. So I don't blame anyone for being on either side of the fence here. But for me personally, I want to go to the SEC championship game, and I want to win the SEC championship. All right, we'll come back here in just a second to the college football playoff rankings and why Alabama is where they are. But first, this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The hard-hitting football action is even better with Prize Picks, and the weather might be changing right now, but the feeling of being right never gets old. So keep the season rolling on Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. This is what we got cooked up for one of the games this weekend, going with Derrick Henry more than rushing yards at 86.5, going with Lamar Jackson less than passing yards, going up against the New York Jets this weekend. And then Tyrod Taylor, he was named as the Jets starter this weekend, going with more than on passing yards for him, because every time he ends up playing in a game, he loves to end up slinging it around. Prize Picks, by the way, also offers injury insurance. If one of your players leaves the game in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks won't count it as a loss. Prize Picks, by the way, the only app that offers stacks, meaning that you can pick the same player up to 3 times in the same lineup. You want more than on Josh Allen pass yards, rush yards, and touchdowns? Well, now you can pick all of them in the same lineup only on Prize Picks. So download the Prize Picks app today and use promo code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That link is down in the comment section of today's show. It's also going to be down in the description of today's video as well. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. All right, we're going to run through 25 all the way up to 1 here, and then we'll get into the bracket, and then we'll talk about why Alabama is where they're at. Starting at number 25, Arizona State. Tulane at number 24. Houston at number 23. Missouri, that's a ranked win for Alabama, still currently in the college football playoff rankings here. 21 is Illinois. Tennessee, all the way down there at 20, so that is a second ranked win for Alabama currently right now. Virginia at number 19, Michigan at number 18, Texas all the way down after that loss to Georgia at number 17. Georgia Tech sits at number 16. USC sitting at number 15. A third-ranked win for Alabama with Vanderbilt sitting there at number 14. Miami at 13. We'll talk about Miami as well and why that's a little bit of an issue where they're ranked too. Utah being at 12. BYU sitting at number 11. We round into the top 10 here. Alabama falls 6 spots all the way down to number 10. And really the big controversy here is why Alabama is ranked at number 10 below Notre Dame at number 9. Oklahoma jumps up to number 8 there. Oregon at 7. Ole Miss at 6. Texas Tech. Now, we'll talk about Texas Tech as well being there at number 5. Georgia sitting here at number 4 now. Texas A&M being at number 3. And Indiana at number 2. And Ohio State rounds out the top 25 there being at number 1. Like I said, we'll talk about that Texas Tech being at number 5 and why there's a little bit of some inconsistencies with that as well. Before we get into that, though, who should be ranked higher? Because this is a big talking point right now for Alabama fans and just college football fans around the country right now. Who should be ranked higher? Type A for Alabama or type ND for Notre Dame? All right, so the current college football playoff committee is claiming that the reason Notre Dame is ranked above Alabama right now is because Alabama's loss to Florida State in Oklahoma being worse than Notre Dame's loss to Miami and Texas A&M, which kind of sounds fair on paper, but the problem with that is their logic just does not track week to week. This is the first time they've really brought up this type of logic into the equation when it comes to ranking these teams with the same record. You go back to the previous couple weeks in their rankings here, Alabama and Texas Tech. Alabama was 8-1, Texas Tech being 9-1. Alabama had that loss to Florida State, who is 5-5 right now. Texas Tech had a loss to Arizona State, who is 7-3 right now. So which loss is actually worse? To me, it means the Alabama. If you use that same logic that they just used to rank Notre Dame above Alabama, well then Texas Tech should have been ranked above Alabama in the previous rankings. So the inconsistencies here is really what makes me mad. And oh, by the way, they also say that they aren't taking into account Miami beating Notre Dame because they aren't close enough in the rankings right now. They're only 4 spots away from each other, and they have the exact same record right now. If they have the same record, head-to-head should be the thing that matters. It's kind of, like, why else are we going to play these games? Also, by the way, you look at the strength of schedule. You look at the teams that Alabama has played compared to the teams that Notre Dame has played so far this year. Alabama, these are all the current rankings right now, by the way, because that is how the committee feels about these teams currently right now, not necessarily where they were ranked when Alabama played them. So Alabama right now arguably has the best win in college football, going to Athens and beating number 4 Georgia. You beat number 14 Vanderbilt. You go to Missouri and beat number 22 Missouri there. You beat number 20 Tennessee. You do have the loss to number 8 Oklahoma. That should be a decent loss. It was only a 2-point loss. If you don't have the turnovers in that game, you still end up winning that game most likely there. Now, I do still think it's fair to factor in the loss to Florida State. Just because it's early in the season, I don't think you should totally take that out of the equation there. But when you look at Alabama now having 4 wins against currently ranked opponents, that's more wins against ranked opponents than Notre Dame has played all season long. First 2 games of the season for Notre Dame, they lose to number 15 Miami. They are at number 15 Miami, by the way. They lose at home to number 3 Texas A&M, and now they did play beat number 22 Pittsburgh, but with that loss, the committee feels like Pittsburgh shouldn't even be ranked at this point. Their only win now against currently ranked teams are against number 15 USC, and who honestly thinks Pittsburgh and USC really outweighs the wins that Alabama has currently right now? And their inconsistencies with their explanations is really what just makes me mad about this. I'm not necessarily, super mad that Notre Dame is ranked above Alabama, because Alabama does have the worst loss when it comes to these equations here, but their reasoning is just out of pocket. It is totally crazy. Hunter Yurachek, the current college football playoff chairman, he is, by the way, the current athletic director at Arkansas. I think that's another issue right now with the college football playoff committee. They have current athletic directors on the committee. That should never happen at all. This is what he said about Alabama and why they are ranked where they're ranked right now. You go back and look at Alabama's game at South Carolina, where they scored 2 touchdowns late to win that game. The next game against LSU, where they won both of those, but did not rush the ball for over 100 yards. Again, against Oklahoma, was not able to move the ball on the ground. So they're saying it's bad that Alabama scored 2 touchdowns late to beat South Carolina, but then they also said that they praised Texas A&M for being able to come back. They were down 30-3 at halftime, at home, by the way, against South Carolina, and they praised them for being able to make that comeback there. The hypocrisy is crazy with the college football playoff committee right now. Last year, it was just win. That's what we heard. You just got to win your games. Now, the wins just aren't good enough. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. This is why the college football playoff committee sucks. It's like communism. It looks decent on paper. You get free stuff. You don't have to worry about paying rent. But when you actually put it into practice, it just absolutely does not work, because the money has to come from somebody. There is absolutely zero consistency from a year-to-year basis or even a week-to-week basis from the college football playoff committee. The biggest joke, by the way, is that, they leave their hat at the door. I think that's the biggest crock of BS that they could say there. Everybody has biases. They show them every single week, hanging their little plain white hat up on the coat rack before they enter the room. It doesn't mean a damn thing. Everybody has biases. By the way, instead of it being a plain white hat, it should say what they do, or it should say what they used to do. Current athletic director at this school, whatever there. People are going to have biases, and because of that, the College Football Playoff Committee is biased. I don't care what they end up saying there. Alabama is already in the college football playoffs as it sits right now. It starts now, because unless, absolute chaos happens around the country in the next 2 weeks here, another loss, even in the SEC championship game, I think that would even send Alabama home for the second straight year in a row.